The night of April 3rd, 1817, in Almondsbury, England, was not a night for being outdoors. It was a cold night, punctuated by a fine persistent rain that turned the village's dirt roads into a thick, treacherous mud pit. The honest villagers huddled together in their homes, near the fire, protected from the darkness and dampness that seemed to penetrate to their bones. It was in this desolate setting that the figure was found. She didn't appear. She simply emerged, as if materializing from the very mist. Found by the village shoemaker near Knoll Park, she was a sight that defied all logic in that place. She was a young woman, appearing exhausted and deeply disoriented. But she was no ordinary wanderer. Her clothes were the first thing that caused shock. Strange fabrics, in colours that didn't belong to the sombre palette of rural England. And, most bizarre of all, a turban wrapped around her head. When they tried to speak to her, she responded. But the words that came out of her mouth were neither English, nor Welsh, nor French, nor any language that the local magistrate or parish priest could identify. They were guttural, melodic, but incomprehensible sounds, which only increased the mystery. She was afraid, but she maintained a posture that was not that of a beggar. There was something about her, a dignity, a strangeness, that intrigued and frightened. She was taken, out of duty and immense curiosity, to the home of the county magistrate, Samuel Worrell. Knoll Park Manor was a place of order and wealth, the opposite of the chaos that woman seemed to bring with her. Inside, by the light of candles and the hearth fire, the enigma only deepened. Mrs. Worrell, a woman of high society, perhaps bored with the routine of the countryside, saw in the young woman a fascinating distraction. They tried everything. Doctors were called to check if she suffered from some kind of brain fever, some madness that made her babble. But she was sane, though clearly exhausted. Linguists and academics from Bristol were brought in. They tried Latin, Greek, Spanish, Italian. They showed her maps, objects, trying to elicit any sign of recognition. She only shook her head, her dark eyes sweeping over curious faces with an indecipherable expression. The strangest thing was her behavior. She refused the food offered, the roast beef, the bread, the wine. She only accepted water and tea, and ate with a delicacy that seemed innate. Even more shocking, she was seen performing rituals. She would kneel towards a point that appeared to be east, cover her eyes, and repeatedly murmur a phrase, Allah Ta'ala, to the English of 1817. Allah meant only one thing, the East, Turkey, the Muslim world. Was she a pagan, a lost Eastern noblewoman? The mystery was unbearable. The weeks dragged on, and the mysterious woman became the most famous and frustrating resident of Worrell Manor. She gestured, pointed, and her incomprehensible language filled the corridors, but no one could decipher it. Mrs. Worrell was increasingly convinced that she was harboring someone of great importance. The story spread like wildfire. It reached the bustling docks of Bristol, a place where the whole world met. And it was from there that the solution came. One day, a man presented himself at the manor. His name was Manuel Enesso, a Portuguese sailor who claimed to have travelled extensively in the Far East. He had heard of the woman and her strange language, and believed he could help. Skeptical, but desperate for answers, the Worrells took him to her. The moment was electric. Enesso heard the woman speak, and to everyone's astonishment, he answered, not in Portuguese or English, but in those same strange sounds. The woman, who had been so closed off, broke into a radiant smile. She answered him. They talked. Mrs. Worrell almost fainted with excitement. Finally, the translator had arrived. Manuel Enesso sat down with the Worrells, with the mysterious woman beside him, and began to unravel the most fantastic story they had ever heard. Through Enesso's translation, the truth was revealed. Her name was Princess Caraboo. She was neither mad nor a beggar. She was royalty. She came from an island called Javasu, a remote place in the vast and mysterious Indian Ocean. Her father was a king, a powerful man. Her story was a romantic tragedy. She had been captured by pirates, cruel men who invaded her island. She was dragged onto their ship, held captive for weeks, destined to be sold as a slave in some distant market. But Princess Caraboo, according to Ainaso, was courageous. When the pirate ship approached the coast of England, sailing through the Bristol Channel, she saw her chance. In an act of desperation and bravery, she threw herself into the icy, dark waters. She swam for hours, battling the waves, until the tide deposited her on the shore. Exhausted, cold, and hungry, she wandered aimlessly for days, speaking her native tongue to people who looked at her as if she were a freak, until she was found by the shoemaker in Almondsbury. The story was perfect. It explained her clothes, the Javasu style, her language, her refusal to eat. She wasn't used to Western food, and her devotion to Allah Ta'ala, the god of her island. English high society not only believed it, it devoured the story. The Romantic era was in full swing, and the idea of a noble savage, of an exotic and pure nobility, was the ultimate ideal. For Mrs. Worrell, this was the confirmation of all her hopes. She didn't just have a guest, she had a prize. Princess Caraboo became the sensation of the season. The Worrells dressed her in the finest silks, although she insisted on keeping her turban, which became her trademark. She was taken to all the parties, balls, and dinners of the Bristol and Bath elite. The local nobility jostled to see her. They watched her eat with her strange manners, listened to her speak in her melodic language, with Ainaso, the sailor, now permanently by her side as her official translator, and were fascinated by her enigmatic presence. She was the romantic mystery everyone wanted to unravel. Men found her beautiful and intriguing. The women copied the style of her turbans. Having Princess Caraboo at one's party was the greatest social triumph of 1817. She had seduced everyone, not only with her story, but with her performance. And what a performance it was. Caraboo knew her story would only hold up if she continued to act exotic. She seemed to be having fun, deepening the charade with increasingly bizarre details. To prove her wild and noble origins, she demonstrated skills that shocked and delighted. She asked for a bow and arrow, and to everyone's surprise, showed remarkable accuracy, hitting targets that English gentlemen missed. She picked up a rapier and demonstrated a fencing style that no one recognized. Agile, strange, almost like a dance, the experts present concluded that it was, obviously, Javasu's fighting method. She climbed trees with agility, something no English lady would do. But the most shocking act, which sealed her reputation, was her behavior in the water. Taken to a lake on the Worrell estate, she simply removed the fine clothes she had been given and plunged in naked, swimming with a grace and strength that left the puritanical society of the time speechless. It was a scandal, but coming from an innocent princess from a distant island, it was reinterpreted as purity, proof of her primal connection with nature, free from the corruptions of Western civilization. The story was too good to remain confined to Almondsbury. Soon, Bristol newspapers began publishing articles about the mysterious princess rescued by the Worrells. From Bristol, the news quickly travelled to London. In a short time, Princess Caraboo was a national sensation. Major newspapers and magazines published lengthy articles detailing her capture, her escape, and her peculiar customs. Artists were sent to the Worrell Manor to sketch her. Engravings of her portrait, wearing her characteristic turban, and holding a bow were printed and sold by the thousands. She became the main topic of conversation in drawing rooms across the country. Intellectuals debated the location of Javasu. Theologians discussed the nature of her god. Allah Ta'ala, she was a phenomenon, a living romantic mystery that captured the imagination of a nation that had just emerged from the long and dark Napoleonic Wars. Caraboo's fame was absolute, and as is known, the higher the climb, the harder the fall. Far from the balls and flattery of high society, in a working-class neighbourhood of Bristol, a woman named Mrs. Neal was reading the newspaper. Mrs. Neal owned a boarding house, a practical and down-to-earth woman who dealt with the harsh realities of life, not fantasies about lost princesses. She saw the article in Bristol Journal. She saw the engraving of the famous Princess Caraboo, and she didn't feel fascination. She felt anger. She looked at that image, at those features, at that gaze, and recognized her instantly. That was no Javanese princess. Mrs. Neal knew exactly who she was. Her name was Mary Baker, though she sometimes used the surname Wilcox. She wasn't royalty. She was from Witheridge in Devonshire, and she wasn't an exotic guest. She had been a servant in her own boarding house. Mrs. Neal remembered her very well, a girl who had a habit of inventing stories, of creating personas for amusement. Mrs. Neal couldn't believe the audacity of it. That girl, a former servant, was deceiving the richest and most educated men and women in all of England. Mrs. Neal was no woman to stand still. Gathering the newspaper as proof, she made the journey from Bristol to the Worrell mansion in Almondsbury. She was not intimidated by the iron gates, nor by the starched servants. She demanded to see Mrs. Worrell, claiming to have vital information about her famous guest. She was ushered inside, into the heart of the charade. The scene must have been extraordinary. Princess Caraboo was there, probably surrounded by admirers, perhaps translating a new fantastic story through her accomplice, Manuel Enesso. Mrs. Neal entered the room. She looked directly at the princess, and, in front of all the wealthy patrons, all the fascinated nobles, she broke the spell. She didn't use the invented language. She used plain, sharp, Devon English. "Mary Baker," she called. "My name is Mrs. Neal. You stayed at my boarding house in Bristol. What do you think you're doing?" The silence in the room must have been deafening. The charade crumbled in an instant. Princess Caraboo froze. The blood drained from her face. There was nowhere left to run. Before that irrefutable witness to her real life, the exotic persona vanished like smoke. Mary Baker, the shoemaker's daughter from Devon, burst into tears and confessed everything. She confessed that the language was a jumble of meaningless sounds she had invented, that Javasu didn't exist, that Enesso, who probably disappeared the moment Mrs. Neal appeared, was an opportunist, and she confessed the reason. She was poor, alone, and desperate to escape a life of servitude. The scandal was colossal. High society, which had fallen in love with the princess, was now the butt of everyone's jokes. The Worrell's humiliation was profound. They had been spectacularly deceived, not by a master criminal, but by a 20-something servant girl with a fertile imagination. The press, which had elevated her to celebrity status, now delighted in exposing the credulity of the elite. Mary Baker's story was, in many ways, even more incredible than that of Princess Caraboo. But something strange happened. Instead of demanding her arrest for fraud and vagrancy, the public, and even her humiliated former patrons, felt a pang of admiration. Her audacity was breathtaking. In England's rigid class structure, a poor woman had, for 10 weeks, turned the tables. She wasn't arrested. Instead, she became a celebrity through her own lie. She tried to capitalize on her fame. traveling to the United States and then to France, exhibiting herself as Princess Caraboo. But the fame of the fraud was less lasting than the fame of the mystery. She eventually married, had a daughter, and finally faded into obscurity, returning to England and spending her days selling leeches to a hospital in Bristol. Mary Baker left behind one of the most bizarre imposture cases in history. A dark tale not about nobility, but about hunger. Hunger for food, hunger for a better life, and above all, the hunger of high society for a fantastic story they desperately wanted to be real. If you were moved by this story, please like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below what you liked most. Your opinion is very important to us. Share this video with someone who needs an inspiring story. Until next time.